Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for people to trickle in a bit. Give everybody a few more minutes. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Just trying to give everyone a few minutes to trickle in. I'm Laura Bayronovan. I just wanted to welcome you all to the 2023 Hot Topics in Environmental Law Summer Lecture Series. I'm the director of the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems and also a professor here at Vermont Law and Graduate School. We're excited to welcome you to the presentation today. For those of you who have attended before, each talk is worth 1 Vermont CLE credit, so just make sure that you keep track of which ones you've attended for your own records. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of today's presentation. If you're watching on the Vermont Law and Graduate School YouTube or Facebook page, you can enter your questions right in the chat or comment space anytime, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. We're really excited today to welcome Professor Marsha Echols. She's a professor of law and also the director of the World Food Law Institute at Howard University School of Law. Recognized as an expert in the fields of international food regulation, international trade, and dispute settlement, Dr. Echols teaches commercial, international business and trade, and world food law, and has extensive international dispute resolution experience, having served terms as a member of the United Nations Administrative Tribunal and as a panelist in a World Trade Organization dispute between India and the European Union. She was the vice chair of the International Dispute Resolution Committee on the DC Bar and is the author of several books and law journal articles about international food regulation. She is frequently invited to speak in the US and internationally about food law and policy and international trade. Dr. Echols studied and worked in Belgium and worked in Switzerland and Washington, D.C. before joining the faculty at Howard. She also served as an international trade negotiator for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and specialized in international agribusiness transactions while engaged in the practice of law, private practice of law. Professor Echols is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Secretary of State's Advisory Committee on Private International Law. She was the liaison to UNIDROIT for the ABA section of international law, having previously served on the section council, and was a member of the board of directors of the Woodstock Theological Center at Georgetown University. She holds a BA Phi Beta Kappa from Howard University, LLMs from both Columbia University and Free University of Brussels, a JSD from Columbia University, and a JD from the Georgetown University Law Center. Dr. Echols joins us this week as the VLGS Distinguished Agriculture and Food Systems Summer Scholar, and today she will present on the Chesapeake Bay. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marsha Echols.
Thank you very, very much for the introduction, and I am very happy to be here in Vermont and to join you again. This is different from our meeting in Spain several years ago, but it's beautiful here. So this is enjoyable also. Thank you very much for helping to arrange the invitation. And I'm looking forward to the time for the presentation and for any questions there might be afterwards. So thank you so much for that. I'd just like to say that the presentation today will be fairly informal. It is designed to try to give persons here a picture of how food and water and environmental issues combine. I've labeled the top the Chesapeake Bay, which is the focus, a regional body of waters, and the Chesapeake Bay from bay to branded. And the idea is to show that what we see coming out of the bay, the foods coming out of the bay, like the fish you see here, really can move from being just a something alive coming out of the water to a branded product. And so after looking at the geography of the bay, some of the cultural and historical issues, I give examples of three food products, based on foods coming out of the bay's waters and showing how some very inventive and passionate persons have created those or moved those products into being branded and certainly popular as we are going forward. So for the discussion today, from bay to branded, I want to begin by looking at the bay from a geographical perspective, the waters, and the geography of the waters, the peoples and the culture of the bay, and then as again using those three products, the food systems in which the bay helps to create a livelihood and environmental protections for some products. And in all of this, sort of underlying it is regional cooperation for this within this region, for the most part. So that is my introduction, and just trying to quickly show what I'm going to present. So waters, the geography, peoples, history and culture, and then food, again, this idea of from bay to branded for food products. I hope I'll make it clear enough and certainly interesting, but not too developed or complex. I think that you'll get some very good ideas, or at least I hope you will. And it's especially important, I think, for people who are not familiar with the Chesapeake Bay region, its expanse, its importance, and how it is important for the economy of the region and its really importance for the nation, as we'll see. So this is there are two pictures of the Chesapeake Bay and the region that is involved. The Chesapeake Bay, we think of, certainly I'm from Washington, D.C., we think of the Bay as something fairly local, but the full Chesapeake Bay region extends from New York State to Virginia. So it's covering a very large part of the East Coast of the United States. The Chesapeake Bay region and the the states involved, there are really 5 states that are important for this region. And you'll get an idea of some of them as you look at the map. But from New York, going through Pennsylvania, there are 5 states involved. Probably the most important are Maryland and Virginia, but West Virginia is also a part of that, and the District of Columbia is included in this Chesapeake Bay region, in part because of the Potomac River that is close to Washington, D.C. But I hope on this slide you can see the names of, maybe it's the next slide, the names of some of the rivers that are involved. So you'll, and maybe you don't recognize the names, but the Susquehanna is in New York State. If you move down, Patuxent, Potomac, Rappahannock, all in either Washington, D.C., the Potomac, or Virginia. And so you look at the names, and they should also make you think about the history of the region. So some of these names we think are names from Native American tribes, those who were in this region, certainly at the time of the Revolution, so hundreds of years ago, and are trying to find a life in the region today, maybe under different names in different places because they have been displaced also. But certainly they have contributed to the history of the Chesapeake Bay region and to the culture, to the foods that we draw from the Bay. So maybe again, a way of trying to give some background is to think about the peoples and cultures of the Bay. The Native Americans who were there even before the settlements by the English, and then African Americans who have become very important in the cultivation of agriculture and seafood from that region, and oyster farmers. We'll come back to those, but it's trying to move on to thinking about some of the products that we know, certainly in my region around District of Columbia and Maryland and Virginia, and that come from the Bay and that provide a livelihood for persons, and certainly also an idea of the effect on the economy as they provide jobs for persons and products for the growing seafood industry that is important to the region. So I think going back. Thank you. As I said, I've selected 3 products, food products that are known from the Bay to use to give you an idea of the relationship between the Bay, our food system, our nutrition, and employment. Also, just remembering that many of these products help to preserve the species, vegetable and animal species that are endemic to the Bay region. So blue crabs are one of those. The other thing to think about is that for both blue crabs and oysters, which I will talk about next, there have been pieces of legislation, points of legislation created, initiatives created to try to restore their habitats in the Bay so that they really continue to contribute to the livelihoods that we have there, and to the safety of the and ecological health of these regions. So the blue crab is the most valuable fishery in the Chesapeake Bay. So it is not a pretty animal to look at necessarily, but it is delicious actually if you like seafood. And they are seasonal to some extent, so there are times when you can find them and other times when they are scarce. The other thing to show the importance of this particular product, the blue crab is the Maryland state crustacean. So just think that the state has taken the time to create its own crustacean, and it turns out to be the blue crab, not just a regular crab, but a blue crab. And the blue crabs really are found primarily on the eastern shore of Virginia, and so along the waters and rivers there. So that is one product, seeing it now in its natural state, and then showing how you move from bay to branded. So the blue crab was known by a woman by the name of Pamela Barefoot, who lived on the eastern shore of Virginia. And she decided that it would be worthwhile and creative to found a company and to develop products that complement the food from the bay. So this is an example of, she created a company called Blue Crab Bay Company. And she built it, won awards for it, and recently sold it to another woman, again from Virginia. But certainly this picture gives you an idea of what they've done. She's done. She took that product that we looked at that you thought was not too appetizing or pretty, and she made a product a soup for it. So this is a cream of crab soup, and you see how she has developed the product and the branding for the product and the trademark for the products that she has. So it's from bay to branded, and she worked on that for several years. That is just, again, giving you what can be done, what comes from the bay, the Chesapeake Bay, and how those products can be moved from just a natural product to a branded product. The same has happened with oysters. Again, for both the blue crabs and the oysters, they are in habitats that are challenged. And the whole idea of restoring the bay, restoring the places where these products, valuable products, grow, are very topical right now. So this is just giving you one picture of oysters. You see them in different forms. These are the oysters being grilled. So the note is that only 1 to 2% of the Chesapeake Bay native oyster population remains. Again, certainly because of pollution, because of other challenges, this very popular and useful product is diminishing in volume, and the restoration efforts that are being conducted by both the government, an organization called the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and you see here NOAA, the federal NOAA, is working to try to restore oysters by 2025. So they have tried to set some goals to achieve by 2025, and now they are meeting to work on goals for the next 10 years. But this is the oyster, and just to show it, it is valuable environmentally, and certainly in terms of creating employment. This is the example of the branded version, a branded version of oysters that I hope you might have heard about, you might not be familiar with. They have created a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called Oyster. And the chef at the restaurant won the James Beard Award for Outstanding Chef in the United States. It's a very prestigious award, and he wanted to focus on two types of oyster in a vegetarian setting, a vegetarian restaurant that has, again, received acclaim from the national and actually international food community. So oysters, oyster mushrooms, and oysters are seafood. The product that we are thinking about give the name to this restaurant, which is now certainly well represented. The chef wanted to have a restaurant with a menu that highlights the bounty of the Mid-Atlantic. And he included environmentally beneficial oysters from the Chesapeake among those products that he wanted to focus on. So again, thinking about the geography of the bay, the extent, the products that are originating from the bay, the seafood and products, but they can be developed into products that are very profitable, that are branded, and that represent the enthusiasm of young producers and working to make a life for themselves and help us to recognize the benefits of the products and the development of the Chesapeake Bay. The next product that I wanted to feature is a salt that you might not think of. If you've traveled around the world, you might remember that there are many countries that feature their particular salts. And the salts are dried from water, different waters that help to give the flavor to the product. And you think of sea salts, not often do you think about salts coming from domestic waters. But again, this is an example of a person with enthusiasm, with entrepreneurship, who have said, yes, this is salt, developed from the region around Delaware, and can be made into a branded product. And so he created this Henlopen sea salt. Henlopen is a town or area in Delaware on the Chesapeake also. So this is a picture of salt, again, trying to make it look attractive and certainly tasteful, helpful in cooking. This is his comment about his business. We are small, local, hand harvesting flaky sea salt and seasonings in small batches from seawater sourced near this town in Delaware, with a slow process and certainly a certain flavor and healthful, no additives or drying agents. So again, an individual with the enthusiasm, with the entrepreneurship, who takes a basic product from the waters of the Chesapeake Bay and develops it into a branded product, creating employment, contributing to the economy, and providing products that often are attractive to tourists who come to visit the region. So in this area, maybe we could think about the positive aspects of this area. Certainly those 5 states, the District of Columbia, cooperate, trying to develop programs, certainly with the help of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and others. And their cooperation is intended to help promote the region, its development, and its certainly its productivity, but done in cooperation. And we began by talking about 5 states and the District of Columbia, but the cooperation extends to pull in academics, scientists, many different branches of the federal and state governments, all trying to find ways to move this region forward, its people, its products, its environment. So I think that is certainly an idea for the Chesapeake Bay that might be important for other regions, whether or not they are based around water. And certainly the oyster, trying to restore the oyster regions is a major part of that. Another idea in terms of, in addition to restoration, which is included in different laws and programs, is an idea for making the Chesapeake Bay a part of the national park system. So just trying to say that it is important. It is certainly a region that should be promoted and recognized as having value for the country, not just for this region. Which again, by going down to Virginia Beach through Norfolk, means that the region has a military significance as well as an environmental significance. There is one quote maybe that Laura, you could tell me more, but there's one quote from an executive order that was published a few years ago when Barack Obama was president. He was encouraging the protection and promotion of the Chesapeake Bay region and created a new intergovernmental, multidimensional regional grouping to plan and act to try to protect and restore the Bay. But in that, in his executive order, he explained the significance of the Bay for not the Chesapeake Bay, not just for the region around it, let's say along the East Coast, but for our national government also. And it is then that he began to look at the Chesapeake for its economic and military importance, and just trying to show why it should be important for the government agencies to join with other persons to try to make sure that we make the Bay stronger, safer, more healthy, and able to contribute to the success of the region and also to the welfare of the country. I would say I've tried to give you an idea of the Chesapeake Bay as a region that is important for certainly along the eastern part of the United States. It has historical importance and also certainly economic, military, environmental importance today. certainly giving reasons for us to pay attention to it, to try to make sure that it is protected and restored. I think that you might have a picture now of the region, the extensive region of the Chesapeake Bay, some of the products that originate in it, some of the cooperations and challenges that are being faced by the region. And I think maybe I'll just say thank you for having participated, and I'd be happy to answer questions. And certainly there are other points that I could add if based on your questions or if time allows. Thank you very, very much.
That was great. Thank you so much, Marsha. So one question that comes, well, first I should say, if there anyone in the audience has any questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat so that we can ask Dr. Echols if she might have some answers for those. One question that came to mind for me, just thinking about all the international work that you do, is how all of this might relate to like certification marks for things like Parmigiano Reggiano, some of those products that are very place-based, and whether or not there are opportunities for that exist for regions like the Chesapeake Bay to sort of have their own. I know here in Vermont, you're only allowed to say things are made in Vermont under very specific circumstances. So you couldn't necessarily create something out of state and then package it here and say it's a product of Vermont. But I wonder if that offers any sort of opportunities for food entrepreneurs or ways to sort of boost the food and culture of that region.
I think that's certainly possible. And I've given you examples of individuals creating their innovative products and trying to find a way to brand them. That probably means trademarking them. And as you know, in the United States, we primarily use trademarks or some version of a trademark instead of a geographical indication. As you know, I've written about, I'm very interested in geographical indications because I think to a larger extent than trademarks, they allow a regional focus and protect the community. So to me, a trademark is individual, as these products illustrate. But you are suggesting, and I think it's important to think for a regional or broader focus that includes more persons and perhaps a community. We're beginning to see some of the Native American tribes look for a community type mark. I don't know whether they would call it a geographical indication. And certainly in the United States, just the idea of a GI triggers is a trigger, I'll put it that way. But yes, others are beginning to think about it and how you might grow the branding, the renown of a region, or a particular product by finding a way to create a new label for it. And I think it's possible. We are, it could be, made in New York, made in Texas, made in Virginia. Certainly all of those are ways of developing a recognition for the foods that come from a particular region and that are produced by persons there. I mean, there's more that could be said about it, but I hope that's enough.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I was thinking as you were answering, I wonder how many people know what we mean by geographic indicators or certification marks, since it's not something that's very typical to the US. And you're right, it is absolutely a trigger in the US. I wonder, could you talk a little bit more about what it looks like in the region for there to be collaboration across producers? So like what are some of the obstacles? Because in my mind, after listening to you talk and even thinking about the idea of having some sort of geographical indicator or certification mark to kind of like boost the region, I wondered what some of the barriers to people working together and working collaboratively in that space might be. I mean, it's such a big region compared to Vermont, and we have a lot of ways for Vermont producers to collaborate. But I wonder if you have any sense of what some of the barriers are to getting there to be sort of some like entity that helps coordinate the region, or maybe that does exist.
I mentioned the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and there are others that are trying very hard to develop collaborations among fisherfolk, different communities within the region, which, as you said, is expansive, so that there are not often are always common interest and common goals. But certainly, I think that they are trying to develop more collaborations among persons. And also, I would say that perhaps within such a large region, maybe the goal wouldn't be to have everybody from New York to Virginia collaborate on one thing, but to make sure that um, you find some smaller ways or smaller groups to collaborate. Um, could it be, you mentioned certification marks. So you could go back to that, finding, having let's say that I don't know, a regional organization create a mark, and then the criteria for who may use it, how that could be developed. And again, I think that many of the, I skipped the discussion about much of the history of the region, the peoples within the region, but certainly many of the Native American tribes and peoples are trying to begin to develop recognition of their history, their products, and maybe, again, as I say, thinking in from a smaller perspective would be a way of starting the collaboration, the cooperation, as opposed to trying to have collaborations, people from New York to, I don't know, to Virginia.
That's great. Thank you. We got a question from the audience. So my question is, are environmental justice efforts in places like Anacostia helping to control the pollution that runs into the bay?
Probably not sufficiently. The bay, the Potomac and the regions around Anacostia and in the Washington area are better than they used to be environmentally, but certainly not ideal yet. And again, I mentioned the idea of in the executive order and in the initiatives that have developed from that, the idea of restoring the bay. So that is a focus. And the idea from that executive order, and in other ways, was to bring together not just government agencies, including the Defense Department, including the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Commerce, and many others that you don't think of bringing together for something like this. Certainly EPA was involved. But the idea was to bring together government agencies, departments, but also other sectors that might have an interest and a way of helping to promote the idea of a better bay, a cleaner bay, a restored bay. And certainly academics and scientists have been brought into that. And that is a kind of collaboration that has been created in order to achieve this idea of protecting and preserving the bay. So I would say with regard to the Anacostia, it's still in progress, but it is better.
That's great. Well, that one question sparked a bunch of questions. So another question that came in is, could you give us a timeline sketch of responses to the problem of pollution in the Chesapeake Bay? And one of the viewers commented that they love the idea of branding to help protect the region and also as a remedy for some of the environmental justice issues. But I shouldn't have skipped ahead to that. So the question was, could you give us a timeline sketch of responses to the problem of pollution in the Bay? And I'm guessing that means like over time, what has it looked like for there to be responses to addressing the pollution that exists in the Bay?
I can't give you an exact number of years, but certainly the efforts have been going on for decades. And some with more, I'd say, direction, more involvement than at other times. So again, thinking we are, what are the what are the governmental policies? What are some of the issues and priorities of each government, executive branch government for us? So that has affected the timing and it's not just the timing, but the funding that the federal government is willing to contribute to address this whole issue. And we're talking about 5 states and the district on the East Coast, but certainly there are other parts of the United States that have priorities with regard to pollution and water issues. So I would say it has been decades trying to address the question of pollution and restore the bay. This executive order that I mentioned, asked for certain actions to be completed by 2025. And the idea is probably they will not be. And so you've got to roll over for another 10 years. Will you have the initiatives? Will you have the funding to make that happen? So it's not clear. I would just say the problem has grown. The reduction in the species that are available, that are strong, is too notable. So can we find a way to at least continue progress that has been made? I think the goal right now is they were challenged for 10 years, and they'll be asking for, I think, planning for another 10 years. And at the end of those 10 years, the bay might not be clean, but it will be better.
I would suspect too that there's probably some conflicting interests there, that some of the polluters or the sources of pollution may themselves be food producers or agricultural operations in some way, but that the impact that they're having isn't necessarily, broadly speaking, beneficial to the region, which probably makes it really difficult to think about that. So we got one other question, which was, I would like to know what broader business or manufacturing that isn't a small local business uses the area's resources in an unusual way. For example, not just for water or not military based. And I would say maybe if you could just speak to what other types of businesses or manufacturing types of businesses use the resources of the region, that would probably be helpful to understand too.
Certainly. I guess as you know, Professor, my focus is largely agriculture, so that's what I always go to when trying to think of examples. But beyond that, I think that there are businesses in the region that are growing in the retail area, um, in production of certain essential products. It could be clothing, it could be um, even toys. But certainly, I guess one of the things I intended to do by illustrating those three seafood products as these were just three individuals who thought of unique ways to take a resource that was there, that might not have been valued or looked at highly, and they found ways to add value to it. It was in their minds, in their passions, in their inventiveness and entrepreneurship. So that I think we can begin to, I'll try to answer the question offline maybe, and as I think through what some other examples might be. But the point is, everybody can develop something. Now, these three products, certainly the salt is probably a small business. The oyster restaurant, again, has achieved international recognition for what it has done. So I think you can say that we can look for what has been done. The point is there is more that could be done with certain creativeness.
That's great. Yeah, when I was preparing to introduce you and to think about some questions for your talk, I looked at a food shed assessment of the region, and one of the big recommendations that they had in their assessment was to develop or to support an entrepreneurial and innovative food culture. And that the hope was that some of the land grant universities and cooperative extension services would really take the lead in doing that to help people think of ways to use the resources and amplify the region by doing that. So I think that's exactly what you're suggesting. The hope is, I think, that people will actually, that the land grant institutions and the cooperative extension services will follow through on some of that.
I think when you begin to look at the research that's being done about oysters, about blue crabs, much of it is being done through universities. Virginia Tech, University of Maryland, within probably University of Delaware. Within the region, there are land grant universities, but there are others that can contribute to the development of products and to the scientific expertise that could help move from the small scale, as the questioner was suggesting, to trying to make these products increased in volume and to reach a wider audience. I always think I've worked with many small food companies, and there's a challenge always, when do you really want to move up? I can supply the local deli, okay, and my product is popular there. But maybe I want to change and sell to Walmart or to Trader Joe's. What are some of the conditions that I've got to meet? What are, to what extent do I lose some control? Maybe I make more money, but maybe not, because each of those larger entities is going to have its own demands and its own requirements. So can you move from producing I don't know, 200 a week to 1,000 a week, which might be a consideration as you're trying to grow. How fast should you grow? How big should you grow? And is that really what you want to do?
Yeah, and at what point do you start compromising? If your idea was to be able to support a sustainable food shed in the region, at what point do you start compromising that by getting so big?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we don't have any other questions from the audience. And I know that some of our students have class at 1, so we need to be conscious of making sure that they can get their computers closed and get themselves off to class. But thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. And I will see you in a little while since we're in the same space, but just in different offices.
And I'd like to thank everyone who was here and participated, and especially thank you for the questions. And if you would like more follow-up from me, please let me know.
Thanks again.